Hello out there. How are you doing? Welcome to my first webinar using Google Hangouts. I certainly hope you can hear me well before we get going. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding your preferences and using this information so that you could improve your relationships. My name is Linda Robert. I'm your relationship coach, and I've been doing webinars for several months now. This is my first one using Google Hangouts, so we're going to see what that's like. A couple of things I do want to share with you first. If you haven't had a chance to download the presentation, let me show you where you can find it. You'll be able to find it on my website, www.lindagrobert.com/muley-single-. And if you can see that, it will be right here, right in red here. You can't really miss it. Access a copy of the presentation here. Also, if you have questions, you'll be able to ask your questions through this little box here, which is right below the screen that you're viewing. So keep those things in mind as well. I'll be able to view your questions, and because I'm not so keen on this system just yet, I might have to wait till the end to answer your questions, so bear with me. This is the first time we're trying this out. So let's get going with the presentation. I'm going to be sharing my screen again. And where is it? There it is. I hope you can see that. Go to the next slide. You can see a little bit of information about myself here, about my background, but one of the things I do definitely want you to know is that I am certified to use the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator for over 2 years now, and I've used it to help some clients understand their preferences and how it may affect or impact their work environment. This is actually the first time that I'm using it to understand relationships and so on. So we're going to be taking a look at our personality preferences using the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI. It's a tool that's often used in the workplace to help you understand yourself better as well as your coworkers. And with this information, you'll be in a better position to accept differences in relationships and to use this information to improve your relationships. There's nothing worse, believe me, than being with someone that drives you crazy. You don't really understand why they're like this. They're not like you, or they may think differently and do things absolutely different than you. So this information will be helpful so that you can understand and accept yourself better, but as well as understand others better in order to improve your relationships. So let's start first with a little bit of context. We'll be using the personality principles of the MBTI, which is based on Carl Jung's work. The MBTI form M is a 93-item inventory that you normally complete by paper and pen, and there's also an online version, form Q, a more in-depth inventory, and one that has about 144 items. These inventories are costly and need to be interpreted by someone who is qualified. Today, you'll be doing a self-assessment, which is typically done during a workshop, and then your preferences are confirmed, usually in a workshop, by completing the form M or by going online and completing the form Q. Now, we all have natural preferences that have been with us since we were born. Jung believed that these preferences do not change, and I tend to believe that too. I remember doing the MBTI quite a few years ago when I was in university, and the code that I had then was the code that I did, a couple of years ago. So I do believe that your natural preferences will not change. They may be shaped by outside influences such as family, education, work, because over time we've had to learn to take out take our information from different sources. We've had to make some adjustments. Typically, that would be unnatural for us, but we've had to. We've had to use different types of information to make decisions, for example. And so we've developed the other side of the preference. Now, in this particular slide, you see that we refer to the right hand and the left hand. Well, we use both of our hands, but we prefer one hand. If I was going to ask you, for example, to write with your right hand, your preferred hand, I should say, then that would probably be natural for you and you would be able to understand exactly what you're saying or what you're writing. But if I asked you to write with the opposite hand, you probably would have difficulty at first to use it. Although, if you had to use it, you would definitely develop that ability. And eventually you'd be able to use both hands, especially the opposite hand, with more ease. However, you'll still naturally prefer your other hand. So it's very similar when it comes to preferences. Before we get going with the self-assessment, let's just take a quick look at some of Jung's theory. He says that we can take in information by either using sensing or using intuition. Now, we can't both use the sensing and intuition at the same time. And we develop a preference for using one or for using the other in order to take in information. And the same would go with how we make decisions about this information that we're taking in. We can't use both at the same time, and we develop a natural preference for using one or the other to make decisions using this information. Now we're going to be moving towards doing the self-assessment. And when you complete the self-assessment, when you're going to be answering the questions or reading the notions that are going to be on the slides, I want you to be not thinking of yourself as the parent or as the professional or you in a relationship. I want you to just be yourself, your natural self. And because we are talking about relationships, I also want you to consider the people that you have in your life now. No, you won't be able to determine for sure what their preference is, but you'll have a general idea, and that's what's going to be useful for you. So Jung also says that we have natural ways of expressing our energies. So extraversion is when the focus is on the outer world of things, people, and events. And introversion is when the focus is on the inner world, the world of thoughts, our world of feelings, our world of reflections. So for the next few slides, we're going to be talking about the E and the I, the direction we focus our attention and our energy. There's a bit of a graphic to help you understand a little bit more. The extroversion, natural focus is on the external world, and introversion, where your natural focus might be on the internal world. So people who prefer extroversion, they focus their energies and attention on the outside world. They're interested in the world of people and things. And as I read these and you reflect on, I do want you to be thinking of where you see yourself. And at the end of each type, I'll be asking you, which one do you think you naturally prefer? Okay, so people who prefer introversion focus their energies and attention inward. They're interested in the world of thoughts and reflection. Although we both use preferences, we're not comfortable equally with both of them. We prefer one over the other. People who prefer extroversion are attracted to the outer world. They are aware of who and what is around them. They love meeting and talking with new people, and you're going to see them shine. They're the ones that are really, really good at networking. They're friendly, they're often verbally skilled, and they're easy to know because they will often reveal inside information, personal information, quite fast. They tend to speak out easily and often at meetings. So they're the ones that at meetings or in social gatherings, you're going to be hearing all the time. They may not, though, be aware of what is going on inside of them. People who prefer introversion are very different. They're attracted to the inner world of thoughts, feelings, and reflections. They're usually very aware of their inner reactions, and you may not know that if you're an extroversion, for example. People prefer to interact with people they know. So the introversions really can connect with some people, much like the extroversions, but they do prefer to interact with people that they know, as opposed to strangers, for example. They're often quiet in meetings or at parties or any type of event, and they may seem uninvolved. They're often reserved, and they're more difficult to get to know because they won't readily share their opinions. They won't readily share their feelings, for example. Not as the external, as the extroverts of their outer world that are around them, because they don't use the outer world to get energies. They use the inside world to get energy. So where do you prefer to focus your attention? Are you more of an E, an extrovert, or are you more of an I, an introvert? And I'm going to be giving you just, a couple of seconds here to think about that. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen here for a second. Oops. I don't think I was sharing that screen. I'm sharing it now. So what I will do, I will go back a few slides here so you can see what I was talking about. There. Let's go back. Now, we were talking about the E's and the I's, and I'll do this part fairly quickly because you've heard me, so I'm not going to repeat everything, but I'll just go and show you the slides that I wasn't sharing with before. And we were talking about the orientation where extroversion prefer focusing on the outer world, while the introversion prefer focusing on the inner world. Let me go through a couple of slides fairly fast here. There you go. Extroversions are interested in the world of people and things, and introversions are more interested in the world of thoughts and reflections. Extroversions are aware of who and what is around them. They enjoy meeting people, while the introversions are usually very aware of their inner reactions and do prefer to interact with people that they know. They may seem uninvolved when you attend a party with them, for example. They may seem very, very quiet. Now, as I was saying earlier, which one do you think you prefer? Your natural ability. Is it to focus your attention or your energies on the external world, or is it to focus your attention on the internal world? Okay, I'm going to keep going now to the way we take in information. The kind of information we like, the kind of information we trust. The S or the I. As you can see in this particular case, intuitions, they will take in the information from various sources. They prefer the big picture as opposed to the sensing, which they take in information in a very sequential, step-by-step way. People who prefer sensing take in their information using their five senses, their sight, their sound, how they feel, what they smell, what they taste. And people who prefer intuition, they go beyond that. They actually start looking at the meaning of things, the association between ideas, the relationship between ideas. I'll give you an example of a coworker of mine that that used sensing. Now, I remember this one time I was in my office, and she came into my office and told me fairly quickly that she just saw one of her clients who had a wet spot around his area, and she immediately said something to him. And that thing that she said to him may not have always been, as far as the intuition side of me says, very nice, because I was also, as the intuition part of me would say, well, we kind of need to take a look at the big picture here. But she was focusing in on the sight that she saw, which was, a patch of wetness in a particular area. Now, people who prefer sensing see and collect facts and details. Here's another example. People who prefer sensing would quickly pick up on sounds such as clocks ticking, or such as their husbands or their boyfriend or girlfriend snoring. They may even have a hard time sleeping because of that noise. People who prefer sensing are quite practical and realistic. They start at the beginning and they take it one step at a time. They're very specific and literal when they're speaking, when they're writing, when they're listening. So as you hear me say this, earlier I was talking about, yes, I do want you to identify your preference, but I also want you to be keeping in mind your relationships, the people that you have in your life. Are people that are in your life speaking very literal? And sometimes you may not know it right away until they said to you, well, that's exactly what I said. I said this, I said that. But if you're the intuition type, you may not have caught up with that right away. So you have to be paying attention. They do live in the present. They deal with the here and now, and they prefer reality to fantasy. The people who prefer intuition, I'm one of those. We see patterns, we see possibilities, we see connections and meaning. We are very conceptual and very abstract. We could start anywhere and take leaps over very basic steps. We generally don't like following a certain order. We may speak and write in general terms and not very specific terms. We may not be paying attention to those kind of details. We like to live in the future, the possibilities, and we prefer imagination and ingenuity to reality. So you could see later on in the webinar, we'll be talking about more of these differences and how to interact with people who are either sensing or intuition. So I'm not going to get into it now, but I do want you to be thinking about people that you may know that may be not intuitive, but may prefer intuition, or that people may prefer sensing. So how do you prefer to take the information in? I'm going to give you a minute here to think about that. Choose the type that you think describes your natural way of doing things. Now, the reason why there's so many differences between types is because the preferences are not always very clear. In some cases, you might be at the extreme end of that continuum, or it might be, I'm slightly this and I'm slightly that. That's why there's so many differences between people, between preferences as well. Okay, let's move on to thinking or feeling, T and F. That's the way we make decisions. So we've talked about how we get the information, either by sensing or by using intuition. Now we're going to talk about the way we make decisions. In this graph, you can see the thinking would make decisions by stepping back from the situation and taking an objective view. But those that prefer feeling make decisions by stepping into the situation, by taking an empathetic view. So the people who prefer thinking make their decisions based on impersonal, objective logic, and people who prefer feeling make their decision with a person-centered, value-based process. And I'll give you an example here. So if I'm with a boyfriend and he's the thinking type, he's going to make decisions based on purely facts. Now, I, on the other hand, who's the more feeling type, before I make decisions, I'm usually going to consider where he's coming from and his opinion before I make the decision, because I value that process. I value his opinion. It's very person-centered. And if I'm at a party or have 2 or 3 different friends around me, I would ask probably each one of their opinions before I make a decision. The people who prefer thinking use logic to analyze the problem, to assess the pros and cons. They focus on the facts and principles. They're very good at analyzing a situation. They focus on the problems and the tasks, not the relationship. However, they may overlook the personal impact of decisions, their emotions, or those of others when they've made the decision. So you might see that in a partner, perhaps, where the partner has made a decision based on purely facts. And if you were the opposite, if you were the feeling type, you would have been offended by this. You would have probably taken it personal. The people who prefer feeling use their personal values to understand the situation. They focus on the values of the group, the values of the couple, for example, the values of the other person, or if you're talking about work, the values of the organization. They're good at understanding people and their viewpoints, and they concentrate on relationships and harmony. So, for example, if you're having challenges in your relationship, if you're the feeling type, you're going to want to really improve this relationship. You might get hurt if your partner, who might be a T, has said something to you, which might have been purely facts, might have been true facts, but you would have been hurt over it. So the people who prefer feeling often overlook the logical consequences of individual decisions. Again, which one do you think you're more naturally inclined to do things? Which way would you be making decisions? Are you a T or are you an F? Just going to stop sharing for a second here and go back to the screen. Hope everything is going okay at your end. Hope you could see the slides now because I'm sharing them. And again, you'll fairly know fairly quickly if you're the T or the F. When I described the preferences, you'll have a really good idea. So start keeping in mind whether you're the I, whether you're the E, whether you're the T, whether you're the F, because at the end, I'm going to be asking you which preference code do you think you have. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen now and keep going. All right, let's talk about J's and P's, judging or perceiving. That's our attitude to the external world and how we orient ourselves to it. And as you can see here, I really like this graph. It's actually one of my favorites. The judging people will have a very clear start time to whatever plans they have and a very clear deadline. And they will start with step A, B, C, D, E, and end on time. Now, I, on the other hand, I'm a P. And as you can see, the approach
with the P's are that we are very spontaneous. We like to use that spontaneous approach. We do meet deadlines though. However, sometimes we rush into the activity. Much like today, for example, I was finishing up the final touches of my presentation. Again, close to the last minute, but I met that deadline. So that's the differences between the judging and their perceiving. People who prefer judging want the external world to be organized and orderly. They look at the world and see decisions that need to be made, and they like doing it. But the people who prefer perceiving seek to experience the world, not to organize it. They look at the world and they see options, lots and lots and lots of options that need to be explored. Now, we all both use these types of attitudes. However, we're not always comfortable. For example, I do prefer perceiving, and I always use the silly example, but when I go to the Tim Hortons, for example, and I'm having to make a decision, oh boy, I'm not sure. I don't know. I kind of want them all. The I want them all, the N part of me says I want them all. When it comes to perceiving, I'm not sure which one I do. I want a little bit of each so that I can experience all of them. Is that okay? And sometimes that's what I do. If I'm asked to take a dessert, I might take a little bit of this one and then a little bit of that one. But when I'm in a stressful situation, I will definitely make decisions. No problem about that. However, I might second guess my decision. People who prefer judging like to make plans and follow them. People who prefer judging like to get things settled and finished. So as I'm reading this, you might be thinking, yeah, I'm like this, or no, I'm not like this, but I knew somebody who was like this. And you might have had some interesting conversations around this, for example. Okay, people who prefer judging like environments with structure and very clear limits. So you can kind of see that if you're not the judging type and you're with somebody who's the judging type, that there could be challenges even in the home front if there aren't any clear expectations. People who prefer judging enjoy being decisive and organizing others. They like to handle deadlines and limits quite comfortably, and they do plan ahead. And this could be way ahead in order to avoid last minute rushes. I went out with somebody who preferred judging. Now, in this particular case, he would be looking at the weather report, not weeks ahead of time. I'm not going to exaggerate, but he would take a look at, let's say, the weather report for the weekend on the Monday and would already plan ahead to not do the activity that we had planned on doing because he didn't want to, avoid these last minute rushes, but because that was what made him feel comfortable. He preferred to plan ahead of time. Now, people who prefer perceiving, they like to respond resourcefully. I like that keyword, resourcefully, to changing situations. They like to leave things open to gather more information. And sometimes that's exactly what we need to do. Sometimes we do not have all the information we need in order to make decisions. And so we like to keep things open and gather more information before we make decisions. We like environments that are flexible. We do not like rules and limits. And let me give you an example of this. When I went to teachers college, I hated rules. I was in the primary junior level, so I was becoming a teacher to teach at the primary junior levels. And this was after I had finished my first master's. I completed a master's in human development, and then that following September, I was in teachers college. And because I was at the primary junior level, and we needed to learn how to teach, that level, there were a lot of rules and a lot of limits, and I struggled big time with this. People who prefer perceiving, do not like making decisions, even when pressed. However, we do make them. Let me make that clear. We obviously make decisions and end up quite successful, but sometimes we really don't like to make them. We tend to think that there is plenty of time to do things, and we often have to rush to complete things at the last minute. Now, does that sound familiar with anybody? Now, if you're the T, you're going to go, yeah, and she drove me nuts, or he drove me nuts all the time. But if you're the P, you go, yeah, that's exactly what I identify with. So how do you deal with your outer world? Which do you prefer? Are you naturally inclined to be a J, or are you naturally inclined to be a P? Again, I'm going to give you a couple of seconds here to be thinking about that. Okay, so you will see that you have a choice. You have a code or a type of E or I, S or N, T or F, J or P. And what do you estimate your type to be? You could be an ENTP, an INFP, for example. What's your preference? What do you think your type would be? And as you can see here, there are a lot of combinations of types, which is why sometimes there's a lot of conflict in relationships. You might be you might be an ENTP, but you're with an ISTJ, for example, and don't really understand each other. And I think now with the descriptions that we've talked about, you're starting to get an idea of why there could be conflicts and misunderstandings in relationships. Now, you need to keep in mind that there is variation within each type, as I was mentioning earlier, and type does not measure intelligence. It doesn't measure normalcy or maturity or psychiatric illness or any of that. So you want to keep that in mind. It's simply a natural preferences, either for your energy or either to where you gather the information from or how you make decisions. It's just a natural preference. Now let's move on to talking about communication styles here. As you can see here, there's a significant difference between the extroversion and the introversion. Introverts who are communicating with extroverts should focus on actions to be taken. They should focus on the results. So again, these are introverts that are communicating with extroverts. Extroverts are those that get their energies from outside of them, and introverts are those that get energy from inside of them. So introverts communicating with extroverts should communicate verbally with enthusiasm and should put emphasis on action over deliberation. Now, if you're an extrovert and you're communicating with an introvert, you're going to know because the introverts are quiet. They may not readily share their opinions. So, for example, if you're with a partner and you are persistent and consistent on wanting to talk about something and they're saying nothing, you might find it really frustrating. The introvert is saying, I'm not ready to talk about this. I need time to think about this and process the information. So extroverts communicating with introverts should communicate a well thought through idea or plan. You should build in time for introverts to reflect before deciding. So if you know your partner is an introvert or your friend is an introvert, tell them, you know what, I'm going to give you some time to think about this. Why don't we talk about it tomorrow? Or why don't we talk about it later on today? Or you tell me when you're able to talk about it. You want to communicate in written form rather than orally. And you want to allow airtime for introverts who wait for silence to speak. So they may not have the answer to you right away, but they're quiet. They're thinking about it. So give them that time to think about it, and then, they'll respond. Now, let's talk about sensing and intuition. Sensors communicating with intuitives should start with an overarching description of the issue or challenge rather than the relevant details. Remember, sensors are the details, just the facts, please. And the intuition is, I can see it all now. So sensors communicating with intuitives should allow room for creative exploration before moving to facts. They should describe the overall goal and strategies before moving to tactics. They should explain the desired outcomes and related challenges of the situation, of the plan, of the event, of the, whatever it is that you're talking about. Now, the intuition side, who's communicating with the sensors, should clearly identify the problem they're trying to solve, because the sensing are going to think, I just need facts. So you need to think factual. You need to think details. Identify what the problem is. Share the relevant facts and details. Now for the intuition people, that may be challenging. And you're not always going to be thinking in detail. So you might have to think, okay, what are the facts? What are the details in this particular case? Might have to take a step back and think about the relevant facts and details. So if you're communicating with sensors, you should reduce the risk factors or the required changes and describe successfully. Now, let's talk about the thinking. Is this logical, or the feeling, will anyone be hurt? If you're a thinker and you're communicating with the feeler, you should be descriptive rather than judgmental. You should use empathy by imagining the other person's perspective, and that might be challenging for you, because if you are always thinking of logical and evaluating the information and making decisions based on purely logic, it might be challenging for you to look at it from the other person's perspective, to actually consider the impact of that information on the other person. So it could be of a challenge. So I also suggest that you use empathy by imagining the other person's perspective. You start with a concern for what is important to people. If you're a thinker communicating with feelings, with a feeler, you should consider a decision's impact on the people who carry it out. And you should start with the positives rather than the negatives. So keeping that in mind. So if you're in a relationship and you're needing to tell something to the other person, start with the strengths, start with the positive instead of the areas that kind of drive you nuts. Now, if you're a feeler and you're communicating with thinkers, this is what you should consider. You should discuss the cost and benefits of the issue, which means you might have to take a step back and write yourself a note so you can tap into that thinking side of yours. You have it. It's just not a natural tendency for you. You should also identify the issue clearly, the principles involved, the potential solutions, as well as their strengths and weaknesses. You want to take a stand and make their case successfully. Be willing to engage in a debate without taking it personal, because the thinkers will probably want to start debating the situation. You, on the other hand, might take it personally. Do not take it personal, but be willing to engage in that kind of conversation. So let's move on to judging, which is just do something, or the perceiving, which is, no, I'd rather just wait and see. Okay, so judgers communicating with perceivers should allow perceivers flexibility around the how they meet their goals. So could be challenging for the judging, because remember, the judging prefer to have a logical order. And that's, in a way, is what gives them comfort. So when you're in a relationship, you might want to consider being a little bit more flexible in how you meet your goals. You want to allow sufficient time for brainstorming, because the perceivers will want to brainstorm ideas. So if you're a judger communicating with perceivers, you should also realize that they're often far more right solutions than their own solutions. You may want to consider multiple options before pressing for a decision. And you may want to understand that over-directing perceivers will lead to their resistance. So you want to keep this in mind, that if you press the perceivers are going to get resentful, probably, and they might just not say anything anymore. Now, if you happen to be an introvert, you're probably not going to say nothing at all. Now, if you're a perceiver and you're communicating with judges, you should understand that a frequent or last-minute change does affect the judges. So you want to keep that in mind. Making last-minute changes could cause conflict. And it's not because they want to be in conflict, but that's because you've unbalanced their natural tendency. So if you're a perceiver communicating with judges, you should take judges' deadlines fairly serious and to the minute. They do mean next week at this particular, by Friday, for example, we'll decide on what we're going to do for the party. So take them seriously. Now, you may also want to balance brainstorming with analysis and decision-making, as well as reopen decisions only when new data significantly impacts the decision. You also want to take a clear stand, because if you don't, you're going to be appearing wishy-washy. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the differences between the E's and the I's. Now, we've already talked a little bit about this. The E's are more talkative, they're more energetic, and they're very enthusiastic about the task, while the I's go silent when they're first asked a question. The E's will answer the questions immediately. The I's wait to see who will answer. And the E's will talk over one another. You could see when you go to a party, imagine being with a lot of I's. Now, if the I's know each other, they're going to be talking. But if they don't know each other, you're going to have a very quiet room. The I's preserve space between themselves, while the E's are really close together. So you want to be paying attention to the dynamics. If you're going to a party with somebody, you might want to be paying attention to these slightly differences between these preferences. Now, I'm going to be asking you in a minute here to look at the following picture in silence, of course. Can't hear you anyways. And to write down what you think you're looking at. So here's the picture here. Take a look at that picture. And what do you think you're looking at? I'm going to take a little bit more time here, because the detailed people out there may really want to take a really good look at it. Okay. So people with a preference for S will describe what they literally see, the physical attributes of the picture, the colors. They're really going to spend a lot of detail saying, the colors of the picture, the shapes of the picture, maybe the artist's name or the size of the picture. They're going to try to make sense out of the shapes, out of the objects that they see. Now, we can usually agree with the interpretations of the shapes when you're an S with an S. You'll agree with the interpretations of the shape. But the people with a preference for N will interpret the picture, seeing various possibilities and various meanings that are highly personalized. Because remember, the ends are using the information from various sources. Now, they might have, remembered something that happened a year ago and bring that into their interpretation of what they see on that particular picture, for example. They often make up a story about the picture. And there's usually an overall encompassing meaning or message behind that picture, which would be absolutely different than the S's. The S's are going to be looking purely at what they see in front of them. So what can we conclude about this? We all look at the same image, but we see things differently. Who sees it correctly? Well, in this case, there really isn't a correct answer, is there? Because both see things the way they naturally see it. We must remember that we all trust our own perceptions while knowing that there are many other ways of seeing the same picture, the same object. So I'm suggesting that you remain open to looking at it from the other perspective as well. Okay, let's move on to a T and F exercise now. I want you to imagine that you've been invited to a party by your partner or a close friend, and your friend arrives ready for the party, and you look at what they're wearing and you say, "Oh my God, no. You're not going to be wearing that, are you?" So who would be saying something like that? It would probably be an S saying that. "You're not going to be wearing that, are you?" Because the N's probably wouldn't think of saying that at that particular time. They may think about it, but they may not say it. So what about you? What do you say and do in these circumstances? So you're going to a party and you're not exactly in agreement to what your friends are saying. Now the T's are going to concentrate on achieving their desired outcome. The partner or friend will change their clothes or they don't go. The T's are going to be frank and to the point in stating their views about the clothing. The F's often say they don't care what the person's wearing. "I don't care. I just want to go to the party." F's are often concerned about embarrassing the person. They take a tactful, indirect approach. So you can see some subtle differences there. What are the implications and applications of this particular exercise? The T's look for faults and helpfully point them out, while the F's look for good things and point them out. The F's may think about the negative things, but they won't say them because they don't want to be hurting their partners. The T's aren't necessarily going to see the positives because they don't see things and take information the same way. So which is the best approach? Well, they're both great approaches. It's helpful to find the negatives or the faults, and it's helpful to look at the good things. Bottom line, be open to listening to the negatives. Be open and receptive to seeing it from another person's perspective. So let's take a look at another exercise here for the J's and P's. Let's say you're planning a picnic for a date. Write down how you would do that. So I'm going to give you a couple of, just a minute here to be thinking about how you would go around, how you would go about planning for a picnic, for a date. Now the J's would plan everything, and I say that because that's what J's do. They like planning. So they would plan everything. They would cover every contingency plan. Even if it rained, they would make sure that they have what they need, in case it rains. The P's, on the other hand, they leave things open. They don't even plan anything. They'd rather play it by ear. They prefer being flexible when it comes to planning a picnic. So what are the implications of this type of exercise? The J's may form a poor opinion of the P's. The P's have to look like J's if they're going to succeed in a relationship. The J's have to pay a price for their need to organize everything. So it might mean a little bit of stress. P's struggle with keeping their attention on the conversation around this planning because they can't stand details. You have to agree that one person will take care of the details, the J person, while the other person, the P, may be better off at the picnic itself, making sure that everybody is having a good time and that everything goes smoothly. I remember this was at work, so I'll give you an example at work here. It's very similar when you're planning reunions or any of those type of events. I was at work and we were talking about a Christmas party, and before you know it, we're thinking of how many candles we want to buy, and we're thinking of the decorations, and I'm listening in going, oh my, this is driving me crazy. So I hadn't done the MBTI, and I wasn't really aware of what my coworkers' preferences were. But after I became certified, it was really, really helpful for me to understand that when I'm planning an event or when I'm with people who are planning an event, that there are going to be people that enjoy the details. So I need to take a little step back and let them do their thing. And then when it's my turn, then I can certainly add my 2 cents and have a really good time during that event, because that's when I shine. It isn't with the details. So let's talk a little bit about what the sources of stress might be. Each of the preferences provide an indication of where the source of stress may be. It's helpful to understand what might cause stress for you, and it's helpful to understand as well that someone who doesn't share the same preference as you may either minimize that stress or have different sources of stress. So let's take a look at this. Okay. Now, these are typical stressors for the E's and the I's. And basically, I'm going to be just reviewing the information that's written there for you. These could be stressors for extroverts. Being alone can be a stressor. Again, when I'm going to be reviewing this, I want you to be thinking of yourself as well as the people that you have around you. So stressors for extroverts, having to communicate mainly by email, because extroverts prefer seeing people, being with people. Lengthy periods with no interruptions might be challenging. Having to reflect before taking action. Having to focus in depth on one thing or getting feedback in writing only might be typical stressors for the extroverts. Now, what might be a stressor for an introvert? Being with others, talking on the phone a lot, interacting with others frequently, having to act quickly without having the time to think about it, having too many tasks and demands at the same time, and getting frequent and verbal feedback. They would prefer having feedback in a written form. Now, when you're thinking of, relationships, it certainly is helpful to understand what the sources of stressors might be. So let's talk about then how we would cope with the differences. So if your preference is extroversion and your partner is an introvert, you might consider these strategies. Consider socializing with others outside of your relationship. Because if you're relying on your introverted partner or friend, you may not get a lot of socializing. You may ask your partner to voice their ideas. You may pay attention to written notes and email. You may want to allow your partner to think about your idea before they provide feedback. Now, if your preference is introversion and your partner's is extroversion, you might want to consider waking up early or arriving at home early to take advantage of the quiet time. You may intentionally seek out a private place or a place where you can go and reflect. You might want to consider taking the long way home because that ride home might be really helpful for you. You may want to plan private breaks during the day, especially on the weekends if you're together, for example, or on holidays, for example. So taking some breaks to collect your thoughts. And in conversations, you may want to voice even partially thought through perspectives. Now, these would be typical stressors for the S's and the N's. Having to attend to realities could be very stressful to the intuitive types. Having to do things the proven way, having to attend to details, checking the details, needing to focus on past experiences, and being required to be practical could be typical stressors. Now, what would be typical stressors for the sensing type? Attending to your insights or others' insight, having to do old things in new ways, having to give an overview without the details, that can be challenging. Looking for meaning in the facts, focusing on possibilities. Remember, they look purely at facts. They use their senses, and having too many complexities because there's just too much stimulation going on might be stressful for the sensing type. So how do we cope with the others? If your preference is sensing and your partner is intuition, you may want to get involved in plans that require long range or future thinking. You may want to practice brainstorming with your partner, preparing yourself for roundabout kind of conversations. Look for patterns as well, and engaging your partner with those type of patterns. It'll be really fun for the intuitive person. Going beyond specifics, trying to discover the meanings and themes behind what is going on. And if your preference is intuition and your partner's preference is sensing, consider using these. Practice presenting information in a step-by-step manner. Provide specific examples. Honor family values surrounding experience and tradition. And read the fine print. Get to the facts straight. Now, what would be typical stressors for the T's and the F's? For the thinking type, it's using personal experience to assess a situation. They may find that stressful. Or having to adjust to individual differences and needs. Or noticing and appreciating what is positive, because that's not a natural tendency for them. Focusing on processes and people. Using empathy and personal values to make decisions might be extremely stressful. Or having others react to questioning as divisive. Now, what would be stressors for feeling types? Analyzing the situation very objectively without adding feelings and emotions to it can be challenging. Setting criteria and standards. Critiquing, focusing on the flaws. Focusing on just the tasks only. Being expected just to use logic alone to make decisions, or asking questions that feel divisive. Because don't forget, the F's need to consider other people's opinions before they're able to make decisions. So that could be quite stressful for others, the feeling types, when they have to ask questions that feel like they're definitive. So you might want to consider these tactics if your preference is thinking and your partner's is feeling. You want to work on plans in which alternative causes and solutions are evaluated in personal terms. You may want to remind yourself that factoring in the impact on people is logical, even if people aren't. You want to soften the critical remarks, finding the positives too. You want to ask for partners' opinions and concerns, looking for points of agreement before discussing issues. And if your preference is feeling and your partner's preference is thinking, you may want to practice laying out an argument logically by saying, well, if this is, then blah, 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 or by considering the causes and effects. You may want to consider understanding that critical feedback is often given in the spirit of improving your relationship. You may want to bring attention to your partner's concern regarding the plans, or use brief and concise language to express your wants and your needs. Okay, so let's move on to typical stressors for the J's and the P's. If you're the judging type, what would be stressful could be waiting for structure to emerge when there isn't going to be, because it's processing, that's what's going on. Or having too much flexibility around time frames and deadlines. Or having to marshal energy at the last minute, or staying open to reevaluate things to do. Dealing with surprises might be extremely stressful for the J's. And for the P's, having to organize themselves and the partner's planning might be stressful. Working within time frames and deadline is going to be stressful. They're still going to be able to do it, but it definitely will be stressful. Dealing with the partner's distrust of last minute energy, or having to finish and move on because you're still going to think, is there something I missed? Developing backup plans might be stressful, and having to plan ahead might be stressful. So here's a couple of strategies. If you're a P, if you're the judging type and your partner is a perceiving type, you may want to seek out plans that have definitive milestones and final deadlines. You may want to wait on a decision for a few days, continuing to gather more information and paying attention to ideas that may come up. You may try understanding that the plans are progressing despite differences in styles, and you may want to make your own milestones and your own deadlines. And if you're the perceiving type and your partner is a judging type, remember to recognize that deadlines set by your partner may be difficult to be negotiated, so you might have to be more open to deadlines. You may have to use a past decision you believe your partner had, and he rushed to demonstrate the advantage of slowing down to gather more information. You may want to become active in planning, where the process is just as important as the outcome. And you may want to keep surprises to a minimum, reducing your options, because the J's don't like surprises. All right, so I hope that was helpful to give you some information on what could cause stress with the other preference, and some tactics, strategies to help reduce that stress, especially in relationships that are, intimate relationships. So here's, before we head towards the last few slides, a little bit of ways to deliver feedback. So if you're the E, you may want to discuss with a peer if necessary, but if you're the I, you may want to reflect on the need for feedback. And in relationships, it's important to be able to offer feedback as well as accept feedback. So if you're the S type, you may want to describe the actual and specific behavior, unwanted behavior, or unfulfilled responsibilities that you've observed. You may want to be concrete, factual, and verifiable. And if you're the N, you're going to be relating the actual behavior to the big picture. Give your impressions about how this behavior or unfulfilled expectation has affected outcomes. And the N's also present your interpretation of these facts. So if you know that your partner's an S, you want to keep that in mind, that they may want or prefer the feedback in more actual and specific terms, more concrete terms. If you're the T, T's usually provide feedback by determining and expressing the logical outcome of this behavior on you and others. And they usually consider the pros and cons of the actions, while the F's disclose values and disclose feelings. And they express that this correction is important and why it matters. And finally, if you're the J, they usually determine any present or future action plans and secure the other person's commitment to change when they provide feedback. And the P's will allow for input from the other person and flexibility in determining any steps. Okay, let's move on to the final slides. I found this particular interesting graphic on a website, www.careerassessment.com, when they looked at different preferences in terms of relationships. So there's a little bit of you'll be seeing in a few minutes here, quite an interesting blend of information. I'm simply going to be reviewing some of the information here, and hopefully you'll have the PowerPoint presentation so you can review it in a little bit more detail. So if you're the ENTP, the designer, you're an outspoken individual, you're resourceful in solving problems and challenging yourself to find new solutions. You're very good at reading people, and you're boring with routine. You're always figuring out how to do things in different ways. And I kind of like what they've done here, when they take a look at your 10% romantic, your 65% sexual, and 25% lovable. I kind of like how they've done that. I'm not going to go through everything here because you can certainly review this information later on, but it's very, very interesting. Let's move on to the next one, which would be the intellectual, the INTJ. They have a lot of drive, and when they have their mind set on something, they pursue it actively. They're very independent, and they hold themselves and their peers to a high standard of competence and performance. They're very goal-oriented, and when they start something, they follow it through. And when it comes to the loving side, they're 40% lovable, 35% romantic, and 25% sexual. Pretty interesting information, I find. See at the bottom here, you're able to see my mouse. It talks about the biggest strength, an ideal date activity, which would be interesting information for you. Now, the director is the ENTJ. They're frank, decisive, and ready to lead in any situation. They like to find problems and processes and fix them. They like to make goals for themselves and plan far out in advance for anything they do. They're always looking to expand their knowledge. They enjoy reading and being well informed, and they like to be in control of situations. And when it comes to the loving side, they're 75% sexual, 20% romantic, and 5% lovable. I'm leaving it on for another second here so you have a chance to review that. The divisor, INTP. They're pretty quiet and contained. They like developing logical explanations for everything that interests them. They're flexible and adaptable. They can be skeptical, and sometimes critical, and always analyzing. They're very attentive, and they like to make people happy. So they would be 50% lovable, 35% romantic, and 15% sexual. The auditor, the ISTJ. They're quiet, serious, and realistic. They like having an organized home, schedule, and life. They're very practical, and when they meet that special someone, they're loyal to the end. They are 55% lovable, 30% romantic, and 15% sexual. The defender, ISFJ. They're quite friendly, responsible, and conscientious. They like to think about others a lot of the times before themselves. They like to make everyone around them happy. They're sensitive, and they're looking to establish a deep bond with someone special. And they are 60% romantic, 20% sexual, and 20% lovable. Pretty interesting information I found. The manager, ESTJ, practical and realistic. They're decisive and goal-oriented. They like routine and paying attention to details in their work and home life. They can be a little forceful when they get their mind around something, and they like doing things their way. Well, they would be 70% lovable and 20% romantic and 10% sexual. The contributor is the ESFJ. They're warm-hearted, conscientious, and cooperative. They like harmonious environments, and they work hard to avoid arguments with people. They like to work in a team environment, and they're loyal to the people in their lives. They're always there to help others. And they would be 55% romantic, 35% sexual, and 10% lovable. The entertainer, the ESFP, are outgoing, friendly, and exuberant lover of life. They're all about being a team player, and they like working with other people to achieve a goal. They like to meet new people and be around the action. They like experiencing new activities with friends. So you can see why they would have a difficult time with the introvert thinker, for example, or introvert feeler. They are 60% romantic, 20% sexual, and 20% lovable. And the chameleon, the ISFP. They're quiet, friendly, and sensitive. They like having their space and like working on their own schedule. They dislike disagreements and conflicts. Sometimes they can be emotionally distant, and they don't like jumping right into commitment. They like having fun and freedom. They are 60% sexual, 25% romantic, and 15% lovable. And the showman, ESTP. They're spontaneous and active. They like to act on their impulses, and they're thrill seekers. They enjoy doing activities with other people and spending time being social. They learn best through doing, and they're all about non-commitment fun. And they are 50% sexual, 35% lovable, and 15% romantic. The innovator, ISTP. They don't like any conflicts. They will never force their opinions or values on others. They can master any tool, no matter how complicated it is. They like excitement, and sometimes they can be a bit of a thrill seeker in their spare time. They are 40% sexual, 38% lovable, and 22% romantic. The advocate, the ENFP. They're an idea person and a people person. They're very authentic and realistic, and they enjoy spontaneous activities. They are opinionated and are very enthusiastic and imaginative. They believe life is full of all kinds of possibilities, and they want to explore those with friends. They're 40% romantic, 30% sexual, and 30% lovable. The confident, the INFG. They're seeking a meaningful connection with someone special. They like understanding what motivates people. They're goal-oriented and committed to their values, but they're also laid back and easygoing, and they believe in a mutual beneficial relationship. They are 60% lovable, 23% sexual, and 17% romantic. We're almost done, guys. The educator, ENFG, are very warm, empathetic, responsive, and responsible. They're good at reading emotions or other people and figuring out their needs. They take both praise and criticism very well, and they like being sociable and doing group activities. And they are 50% romantic, 35% lovable, and 15% sexual. And the helper, the INFP. They're calm at times, shy. They're very loyal to those who are important to them. They're curious and quick at implementing ideas. They like understanding people and helping them fulfill their potential. They're adaptable and flexible, and don't try to make changes in their values, because that's not going to work for them. So we are done our presentation tonight. I certainly hope that you were able to capture the essence of this presentation, which was understanding your preference style, and as well as understanding that there are many differences in the people that we are relating to. So it's helpful to understand that these differences may not need to cause any conflicts between you. So if you understand that they may be an introvert or they may be the sensing type, very different than you, you now know what to do to help improve your relationships. So I thank you again for joining me. This presentation will and is being recorded as we speak. I'm going to be providing you with the link afterwards so that you can review the information if you'd like to doing that as well. Keep in mind that we also have other types of presentations coming up, so check out my website at www.lindagrobert.com. As well, I'll be having a new website in the next few weeks or so, and I'll be sending out information concerning that. Have a good night. See you next time. Bye-bye.